Welcome to this explainer. Today we're going to completely deconstruct the modern classical concert to reveal its, quite frankly, highly surprising and practical historical roots. You know, if you've ever sat in a hushed auditorium waiting for the conductor's baton to drop, you might have just assumed this solemn, refined tradition has existed perfectly unchanged since the dawn of music. But as we'll see today, the concert experience as we know it, it's actually a masterclass in social engineering, commercial hustle, and a few surprisingly practical fashion trends.
Okay, let's kick things off by looking at a very familiar baseline, a modern, dignified university symphony orchestra concert. Take this 2019 spring concert at Andrews University, for example. This is exactly what pops into our heads when we think of classical music, right? You've got the prestigious university logo, the highly organized program, that hushed anticipation in the room.
And when you check out the details on a program like this, you see a highly structured, refined event. It features specific, celebrated soloists like Carla Trinchuk on violin and Claudio Gonzalez on viola, and it honors revered composers like Mozart, Verdi, and Ravel. But here's the catch. This high art experience, with its totally silent audiences and scheduled programming, wasn't some natural phenomenon. It literally had to be artificially constructed over centuries, evolving out of pure necessity and shifting power dynamics.
Section 1. Time, news, and coal, the pragmatic ingredients. To really peel back the layers of this modern experience, we have to travel all the way back to the late 17th century. Before this time, the absolute center of non-religious musical activity was the aristocratic court. But as the middle class started rising in prestige and financial power, music slowly began moving out of those exclusive courts and straight into the public sphere.
Because here's the thing, public concerts couldn't just happen because people wanted to hear some tunes. They required 4 highly pragmatic ingredients to align perfectly. Obviously, you needed musicians of a high enough caliber that people would actually pay to hear them, and an audience affluent enough to buy the tickets. But practically speaking, you also needed a reliable way to communicate the when and where, which only became possible via the rise of newspapers, like the London Gazette in 1665. And finally, you needed accurate timekeeping so a bunch of strangers could actually assemble at the exact same moment.
And think about how wild that is for a second. A simple clothing trend literally revolutionized live music. In the 1670s, King Charles II introduced the waistcoat into British fashion. Why does that matter? Because it gave men a convenient little pocket to hold portable watches. Without the waistcoat and the widespread adoption of the pocket watch, a scheduled public concert would have been an absolute logistical nightmare. Thanks to fashion, audiences could finally assemble accurately at an advertised time.
So, with the logistics finally in place, who do you think hosted the first great concerts? Kings? Dukes? Well, it's fascinating because early concert culture wasn't born in grand halls at all. One of the most intriguing figures of this era was Thomas Britton, known as the musical small coal man. From 1678 to 1714, he hosted these top-flight concerts in a cramped, dark room right above his London coal warehouse. Seriously. Yet this humble space attracted the absolute finest musicians of the day, possibly even George Friedrich Handel himself.
Section 2. London's concert boom, a commercial free-for-all. Let's look at how a lack of royal arts funding birthed a booming, democratic commercial music scene that would change history forever. Unlike the French monarchy, the British crown, particularly after the Restoration, just didn't have the massive funds required to sponsor magnificent court music. So, because the monarchy lacked those funds, royal musicians had to become commercial entrepreneurs just to supplement their income. This lack of funding accidentally birthed an entire industry. It created a super vibrant gig culture in London that rapidly evolved from John Bannister's house in 1672 to coal warehouses to musical societies meeting in taverns and eventually to purpose-built exclusive venues like the Hanover Square Rooms by 1775.
And right alongside those indoor subscription series, London featured something entirely different, the pleasure gardens. The most famous of these was Vauxhall Gardens. This was a completely democratic musical leisure experience. Literally anyone suitably dressed could buy a ticket. You could walk, talk, eat, and socialize while hearing first-class music. Just imagine the scale for a moment. In 1749, a public dress rehearsal of Handel's music for the royal fireworks at Vauxhall attracted a staggering crowd of around 12,000 people. London was just an absolute free-for-all commercial music market.
All right, Section 3, Vienna and the Genius Myth, aristocratic pushback. Now let's shift our focus over to Vienna. Because if London was a commercial free-for-all, Vienna was about to engineer a highly strategic aristocratic pushback against this whole middle-class commercial music boom.
When we contrast these two cities, the difference is honestly striking. While London totally embraced a ticketed, tavern-driven market, Viennese musical life was deeply hierarchical. But in the 1790s, as the middle class started creeping into musical sponsorship, the Viennese upper class sought a way to separate themselves. They knew they couldn't just rely on private court orchestras anymore. Instead, they decided to differentiate themselves by supporting music that was distinctly more learned, grandiose, and serious. They needed to build an aesthetic barrier.
To anchor this new, serious music ideology, the aristocracy totally championed a brand new concept: the musical genius. In the late 18th century, a genius wasn't just someone with really good technique anymore. It was all about an inexplicable depth of feeling and profound emotive power. And the Viennese elite? Well, they found the absolute perfect embodiment of this new, serious aesthetic in a young composer from Bonn. You might have heard of him: Ludwig van Beethoven.
Just look at the deliberate PR campaign in Count Waldstein's famous farewell quote. When Beethoven left for Vienna in 1792, his patron Count Waldstein wrote this in his album. And it wasn't just a nice parting gift, it acted as a highly calculated strategy. By constantly repeating this narrative, the aristocracy strategically constructed Beethoven as the ultimate, direct heir to Viennese high culture, effectively crowning him the genius who would elevate music far above middle-class frivolity.
This deliberate cultural push really came to a head in events like the famous 1799 piano duel between Joseph Wolff and Beethoven. Wolff played with this brilliant, clear, Mozartian precision, a style that was immensely popular at the time. Beethoven, on the other hand, played with a heavy, powerful, and totally fantastical style. This wasn't just a battle of notes, it was a clash of aesthetics. Beethoven represented the new, heavy, serious music that his aristocratic backers were using to define high culture. But here is the absolute incredible irony of this entire historical moment. Despite being the poster child for this anti-commercial, aristocratic agenda, Beethoven was actually highly commercial himself. His income wasn't just coming from noble patrons. He earned significantly by selling highly profitable sheet music for lighter dances, variations, and popular tunes directly to the exact same middle-class public his patrons were trying so hard to distance themselves from. He played both sides of the market masterfully.
Which brings us to Section 4, the legacy of live music, creating the concert. So we have London's commercial gig culture on one hand, and Vienna's aristocratic construction of high art on the other. Let's bring these two threads together to see exactly how they created the concerts we attend today.
Jumping back to that Andrews University's Symphony Orchestra program we started with, we can now see this event not as some isolated, timeless tradition, but as a direct, fascinating synthesis of these historical forces. The very existence of this orchestra on stage is the product of centuries of intense social negotiation.
Literally, every single element of the modern concert experience is a hybrid. The scheduled programming, born from pocket watches and London newspapers. The commercial ticket sales, born from London's gritty tavern gig culture. And what about our quiet reverence for the composer as a genius, and the expectation that the audience remains completely silent and attentive? That is a direct inheritance from the Viennese aristocracy's strategic construction of serious music.
And knowing all of this, it really leaves you wondering about the very foundation of how we judge music today. If the concept of the musical genius was, at least in part, a tool used by aristocrats to secure their own social standing, what would our modern musical standards look like today if the Viennese aristocracy had simply decided to back a totally different composer with a completely different style? It completely reframes how we experience art, doesn't it? So next time you walk into a live concert, take a look at your watch, grab your printed program, and remember the highly surprising history that built the stage right in front of you. The classical concert isn't just about the music. It's this beautiful, structured collision of royal fashion, a coal merchant's warehouse, and a brilliant aristocratic PR campaign. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the history behind the everyday.